Now, in the over 8 months since this all began, one of the main things we've been trying to do in this channel is just to sift through and take on the lies, deceits, gaslighting, deflection, muddying the waters, basically the modus operandi of Israel's propaganda machine, plus that, of course, of its extremely powerful allies, not least the US administration. There's no better person to talk about taking on, I suppose, these unbelievable, outrageous lies and attempts to gaslight all of us than Omar Baddar, who I've spoken to many times throughout this horror, a brilliant American Palestinian analyst. Really can't recommend your work enough, but it's always great to see you, buddy. How you doing?
Thank you so much. Owen, I'm doing good. How are you doing?
We move. I've got a cat running around. Hopefully he won't attack the camera, though he sometimes likes to get involved. Yeah. I just thought, actually, because I really, when this happened, I was just, I wanted to talk to you about this. and it's just the utter obscenity of the so-called hostage release operation in which huge numbers of Palestinians were massacred, including many children, but also, of course, women and men who were slaughtered. And this was portrayed as a heroic operation, like something out of a Hollywood movie. And I just think it really, just in really gruesome primary colours, the way that Palestinian life has been utterly devalued with no subtlety. It was such a striking case study, wasn't it, in the worst way?
It really was, Owen. And the levels of absurdity also on this are quite interesting. So there is the point that you make, which is the devaluing of Palestinian life, that you look at an operation, you rescue 4 Israelis, you kill 270 Palestinians at least, and a little bit more than that, most likely. And to look at this and celebrate a great success, you can only do that if you're openly saying that Israeli life is more valuable than Palestinian life. That is effectively what you're doing. Now, it's not surprising that that's the position of the Israeli government. It is an apartheid government that has long devalued Palestinians, never saw them as equal human beings. And so there's nothing shocking about the Israeli reaction and celebration. What is shocking is the rest of Western media and Western leaders who do react to it with the same jubilation. So it's interesting that we have the American government and many other governments openly saying also that Palestinian life is less valuable in some way. But the second layer of absurdity is that even if you were to accept Israel's calculus on the value of Israeli lives, this is an operation that, according to Hamas, killed 3 other hostages. Israel lost one of its own commanders in the operation. So they've killed effectively as many Israelis as they have rescued in the process of just this one narrow operation, at a time in which there is a deal on the table in which you can release all the hostages without costing a single life. And that calculus to me is what's even more infuriating in a way, because even within the lens of a racist framework that devalues Palestinian life, there's still what we're witnessing in Israeli society, that they're effectively lying to themselves about the impact and the consequences of their own military actions. You've had nothing that they can show for in terms of showing any kind of success, except the utter destruction of Palestinian life in Gaza. That is the one thing they can lay any kind of claim to as what you can call a quote unquote military success. And frankly, you kind of have to be a monster to view that as also something to celebrate. But on every other front, in terms of the way that they have dealt with their own hostage crisis, the estimates go anywhere between 40 to 70 Israeli hostages who have been killed by Israeli bullets and bombs throughout all of this. And to operate under the pretense that Israel is doing this heroic thing of rescuing hostages and doing whatever it takes, what it takes is ending this mass slaughter, making a deal, getting the hostages out, and moving on with the rest of your life. And when we talk about moving on, we're not even talking about complete freedom for Palestinians, ending the occupation, dismantling apartheid. You don't have to go that far to free all Israeli hostages. You simply have to stop the massacre that is unfolding day after day in Gaza. And it's just difficult to put into words what it means for Israeli society that even that seems like a step that is too far for them, that they would literally rather continue this mass slaughter unfolding in Gaza, this mass starvation campaign, the utter devastation of just millions of innocent people in the process, and say that this is better than getting their own hostages back if it means ending that kind of slaughter. It's just I don't know. The level of impunity that Israel has enjoyed for year after year has created a climate in which Palestinians are so dehumanized and people are so drunk on their own power that to even question it in the slightest and to say that they can't torment Palestinians whenever they feel like it, that there should be some limits placed on that, is for them an affront that merits going as far as they currently are, just to say we can do whatever we want. That's really what it boils down to.
I think it's really striking talking about this. I mean, gaslighting, which is a term that, frankly, we have to just keep using all the way through because it is what it is. That's what we're up against. This is such a striking case study in that you're right. This is about, firstly, the total racist dehumanization, devaluing of Palestinian life. But the perverse irony is our position is to give more priority to Israeli civilian life, because, as you say, the only big hostage release came through prisoner exchanges, and that was through a ceasefire. Israel has killed far more hostages than it's rescued by military means, by an order of, as you say, I mean, they've rescued 7, perhaps, so it's maybe up to 70, so up to 10 times as many they've killed. And also, the net consequence of this operation is to make a ceasefire deal less likely, and therefore the safe return of further hostages less likely. So it just shows by the racist dehumanization of Palestinians actually means in practice more dead Israeli hostages.
Yeah, exactly. It's completely, it's just, there is no way for Israel to achieve the goals that it openly said it was going to achieve. They set out 2 goals openly. One, the defeat of Hamas militarily, and the second is the rescuing of all hostages by force. And by any measure, those 2 goals, 8 months on now at this point, have been a complete and total failure. And rather than sit with the limits of Israeli power and think about how you can create a better future for Palestinians and Israelis alike, even if the Israeli government's concern is only a better future for Israelis, there's a path forward for that does not include this. But again, it's a situation in which they can't imagine the thought of treating Palestinians like their lives matter, that they are human beings, that they're entitled to rights, that they're allowed to fight for those rights. That all is just beyond the pale for them, that they would rather be stuck in this endless slaughter. And the only way they can salvage some sort of victory out of this, and I think that's what Netanyahu is banking on, is effectively to completely destroy Gaza, to ethnically cleanse the Palestinian population out of Gaza. And then by extension, you will have defeated Hamas in some fashion because there isn't a Palestinian population left. There has to be a line drawn somewhere by the rest of the world of saying, if the price of you claiming your stupid and foolish military victory is the complete and total destruction of another people, that is a line too far. That no, we will not let you go that far. That you've killed 40,000 people already. You've destroyed more than 80% of Gaza. Enough is enough. Just put an end to this. And yeah, it's not as if the rest of the world doesn't agree that we need to put an end to it. It's the sheer timidity with which the Biden administration is dealing with all this, is that they clearly want it to stop. And yet they can't help themselves to just continue empowering Israel to do whatever it wants and just, meekly popping up in the back and saying, hey, could you guys maybe tone it down or consider stopping it? And then Netanyahu tell them effectively to go screw themselves and does whatever he wants. And the response from Biden is to just keep the flow of weapons going. It's honestly infuriating.
I mean, speaking of just infuriating the US administration's position, I was talking about this with Mehdi Hassan on Zetio. I was reading this article in Politico a few weeks ago, and it was infuriating because it was US intelligence officials briefing off the record, almost acting amazed as they brief that, firstly, Israel has killed fewer Hamas militants than it claims, but also that there had been a constant replenishing of those Hamas militants as more and more joined. And I just thought, you people think, you're supposed to be the so-called intelligence community, the world hegemon superpower. This is your life. And it's like they were just the most obvious point anyone could have said on the 7th of October. And they were saying it as though it was kind of the brand new information. I don't know. It's just the strategic catastrophic defeat of Israel. That's why they're holding on to that's the hostage thing is a life raft, isn't it? They're like, because it's they failed in every terms. But it's just like, I mean, it's just the fury you must feel as well. It's so obvious what was going to happen, and then you have it briefed by US administration officials bemoaning the failure of Israel's onslaught as if that wasn't obvious from the start.
Yeah, and it's funny because it's so easy to see it when you just ask a very simple question. When you talk about defeating Hamas, a useful question in defeating them is to say, how were they created? How did they come about? And when you answer that by saying they have come about through the mass brutalization of the Palestinian civilian population that drove many of them into the arms of militants and decided to become more extreme in their views about what it takes to actually fight back and get freedom, then it follows logically that to devastate the Palestinian civilian population and to brutalize them even more is doing things, it's to self-defeat your own stated goal. This is obviously going to lead to more despair and desperation and drive people more into the arms of people who want to fight back and get vengeance by any means possible. And I think part of the calculus here, and I know we're going to end up touching on Lebanon a little bit, is the precedent that has Israel acting this way is that Israel successfully punished the civilian population into demanding the departure of the PLO back in the early 1980s, that they've put such an unbearable cost on the people of Lebanon that the Lebanese people felt like, okay, maybe this is not our fight. Maybe the PLO could just go. Like, this is not something that the Lebanese people should be subjected to. The case of Gaza is completely different because Gaza is not, Hamas in Gaza is not some foreign entity that came and landed in Gaza. It is a product of Gaza. And the prospect that follows this war is not, again, a future in which Palestinians can just be free of Israeli bombing and occupation. It is a return to a status quo in which Palestinians are besieged and controlled by Israel in every way possible, in which they are denied the right and the freedom to just go about their lives, to have self-determination, to trade with the outside world, to travel freely. None of this is on the table. So you're not going to create a climate in which there is so much pressure on the civilian population that they want to distance themselves from some kind of foreign conflict that they can imagine being free from, because Palestinians are at the core of Israeli apartheid and Israel's war on the Palestinian people. That is the core aspect of this conflict. It's not some side issue. And so that calculus has proved wrong over and over and over again. They've learned one wrong lesson from the early 80s and they keep repeating it. And the outcome is endless conflict until the apartheid regime falls. And it's only a matter of time before it does. And unclear to me how long it will take, but it's equally obvious that until it does, we're going to be stuck in this cycle of endless death and violence that overwhelmingly impacts Palestinians and destroys their lives in a very, very disproportionate fashion, but also is not a cakewalk for Israelis either. They're also on the receiving end of and suffering the consequences of this violence, and that they can't have a normal society. They're just constantly stuck in this cycle where they have to justify their oppression, and that's not healthy for anyone.
That's what happens when you hate another people more than you love your own. In terms of just gaslighting, more gaslighting, this is the so-called ceasefire agreement. And, I find it really interesting that there's a type of liberal who quite correctly spoke about how Donald Trump and his officials would just gaslight people, just, turn reality up on its head, basically say, don't listen to your lying ears or believe your lying eyes. And they've said, well, Israel has this ceasefire deal and Hamas is refusing to accept it. Just talk. Let's just talk us through that.
Yeah. I don't even know where to start. It is the depths of absurdity here that we're talking about. You have a ceasefire. The primary tension, just for context, between Hamas and Israel is willing to accept a quote unquote temporary ceasefire, get all its hostages back, and then continue the genocidal war on Gaza. And Hamas's position is, we don't want a temporary ceasefire and give up all the hostages. What we want is a full end to the war. So we're happy to give up all the hostages, but we need a permanent ceasefire in this situation. And the United States comes along, takes an Israeli proposal that has phase 1 as a temporary ceasefire, phase 2 as a permanent one. And in between, of course, Israel's condition is Hamas has to surrender. And Biden presents this as an Israeli offer that can end the war by adding his own twist, leaving out that condition that Israel has for phase 2, and simply saying, as long as negotiations are ongoing between phase 1 and phase 2, that ceasefire can extend indefinitely. And here you had both Hamas and Netanyahu kind of suspicious of what those parameters are, because from Hamas's perspective, they see it as a ploy to give up the hostages. Then Israel says, okay, those negotiations have failed, and then the war continues. And from Netanyahu's perspective, he's worried about the opposite scenario, where that temporary ceasefire, as long as Hamas is talking, that there might then be enormous American pressure on Netanyahu to say, no, the ceasefire has to hold because we're still having a conversation. And Netanyahu kind of just got around all of that by immediately issuing a statement saying what we've presented is a deal in which the war is allowed to continue until our objectives are met. So that is transparently a rejection of Biden's suggestion that there's going to be any kind of indefinite and, a stop to this war as a result of that deal. And Israeli ministers, one after the other, made the same point over and over and over again. And so Hamas, looking at this, is basically saying, okay, there is this American deal. The Israeli government is reacting to it by saying the war is going to continue until we win. And so we want some kind of guarantee that this is going to be a real ceasefire in the frame that Joe Biden had actually presented, because Joe Biden did present it as a potentially a deal that could potentially end this war once and for all. And that's obviously something that Israel is openly rejecting. And then the American government turns around and insists that the Israelis have accepted the deal and that Hamas is the only reason why we are not moving forward with it. You are basically being asked to ignore, to not believe what Israel is openly saying to you. What Israeli leaders are saying is the war will continue until we win. And the American position is that this is a ceasefire deal. That's what Israel is offering. I mean, there really are no words to describe the level of absurdity that we're describing here. They're trying to spin an Israeli deal that allows them to continue the war indefinitely as a ceasefire deal. And they want to tell you that Hamas, that actually wants a ceasefire deal, desperate for a ceasefire deal, you might even say, saying all we want is a guarantee that this is going to be a real ceasefire. They're turning around and pointing at Hamas and saying they reject the ceasefire. It's completely ridiculous.
Because obviously it's just Kafkaesque nonsense, which is there will be a ceasefire when we achieve total military defeat, and therefore by definition there's a ceasefire because there's no one firing at you, which is impossible because Hamas just constantly will be replenished with recruits or whatever other force, unless, as you say, you just wipe out Gaza and its people and drive the survivors out. I just wondered about, because we've been talking a lot with many of the guests about the collapse of Israeli impunity. We've had a global south that was already pretty hostile, just, lead the charge. We've had the global north pro-Israel front crumble to a degree, at least from where it was. We've had the ICJ, we've had the ICC request for arrest warrants. And yet the starvation policy has only escalated again. The deliberate starvation of the Palestinian people in Gaza. And as an example, Israel tweeted out this tweet, which we need to talk about the elephant in the room. Many Gazan civilians participated in the horrific events of October 7th. And then it has in it, like, many Gazan civilians murdered, raped, looted. And then they include a quote from a hostage. There were no innocent civilians there. They paid for that to be an ad. So they deliberately paid their own money to promote that across the world, and then they deleted it. That's just obvious genocidal intent. I mean, that's just like, add that to the pile. But the point I'm making is, what gives? What is that? Because it's like they're not. You'd think like the walls are closing in on them, but they're not behaving like that at all. They're acting like they have total impunity.
Yeah, unfortunately, they're not wrong, right? As you have at the end of the day, they fully understand how much there is a shift in global public opinion against their absolutely monstrous policies. But they've reached the point where they don't care less about that and more about just the technical, physical, logistical support of the United States government. The endless flow of weapons and the vetoing of UN resolutions, that effectively is the mechanism that stops any meaningful accountability for Israel. And I think that's, as long as they have that, and between Joe Biden and Donald Trump being the only potential alternative, they do have that unconditional backing, and so they don't feel like the walls are closing in, apart from this endless frustration of the cycle that they're stuck in. And it is worth noting that the logic that they use to say there are no innocent civilians in Gaza, it's identical to the logic that led bin Laden to 9/11.
Exactly.
It is the idea that the civilians on the other side are always, by definition, complicit in their own society and what government they produce and what they accept and so on. It is just, again, it is frankly shocking that we live in a world, and what they're counting on here is the racism of the audience, the endless barrage of anti-Palestinian propaganda that many people in Western societies are subjected to through biased media coverage. I think they're counting on that factoring in so that people might potentially believe this idea. And we have seen these kinds of sentiments being echoed even in mainstream American quote unquote liberal platforms here in the United States where there is, people do express that view of really how innocent are the civilians in Gaza really anyway. It is dehumanization, pure and simple. It does speak to, anybody who knows Palestinians in their real lives would take this immediately as incredibly shocking and offensive sentiment and transparently untrue. You don't need to be a particular expert on Palestinian society to know how insane and outrageous it is to kind of suggest that an entire civilian population is complicit in some way. And yet, it really is that fundamental racism. It's the same reason why Western governments do celebrate the rescuing of 4 Israeli hostages at the expense of hundreds of dead Palestinians, and they think that's a victory. It doesn't follow very far from that to basically also suggest that who really cares about the lives of civilians, because how civilian are they really? It's pure racism. It's and the thing is, Owen, is that I constantly operate under this imagination every once in a while, every few, I don't know, this idea that hardcore racism is something that is in the past, that now it's more subtle forms of racism. And then events like this unfold. And it reminds you how little progress we've actually made, that a society like the United States can, in its mainstream discourse, grapple with our racist history towards Black people in the United States, grapple with the idea of racist policing and the changes that need to be made. But anything that is 1 inch, no matter how analogous, when it comes to a foreign policy issue, racism just sets right back in as a mainstream force. Nobody blinks when a mainstream US politician says all Palestinians are Nazis and there are no innocent Palestinians and flatten Gaza. That rhetoric does not get any kind of reaction. It's just taken as if it's acceptable part of mainstream discourse and thought. And that is just a really, really harsh, disillusioning reminder of how much work there is left to do on every front in terms of, disintegrating the racist core that is part of the thought behind American imperialism more broadly, and in the way it relates to this particular issue as well.
I have to say, I mean, look, in my lane as a white Brit, obviously I was aware in terms of the racism that underpins Western imperialism, the political, the media elites. But so I'm not surprised, but I never stopped being shocked since this began by the lack of subtlety in essentially declaring that Palestinian life has no real value or meaning. I mean, it's not subtle, is it? I mean, that's the thing. That's what the point you're making. It's, before there was this idea of, there would be an attempt to dress up racism, I suppose, basically, and try and make it subtle and coded. But the way that politicians, including people who call themselves liberals and progressives amongst them, I mean, that's what's so striking. It's very loud and proud, isn't it? It's brash.
Yeah. And in a way, I don't know, it's just ripping the mask off of something that is still really ugly. And it's bizarre to call this liberating, this moment, because obviously it's been overwhelmingly just absolutely awful and horrific in terms of what is unfolding on the ground. But I feel liberated from the pretense that we're all operating out of the same values when we have a conversation, that we're disagreeing about the facts and subtle policy choices and differences and what is the best way forward, and just being relieved of that and accepting the fact that we have real political opponents in our own societies that we don't share values with, who don't see equal value to all human life, who don't want a future in which everybody is free and equal. That is not their vision. And to just accept that we have to win. It's not about talking to them about reaching the right compromise. And if it's a misunderstanding, and if only we understood each other better, we could figure this out. This isn't a misunderstanding. We have a perfectly clear understanding of where we stand and where they stand. And it's about fighting for a society in which our values win and theirs lose in order to create a more just and equitable future for everyone.
I just finally wanted to ask you about Lebanon, which you mentioned earlier. And for those who don't know, I mean, the context there is very important. Israel's invasion in 1982 was of southern Lebanon, and then the attack by Beirut was brutal. So brutal that Ronald Reagan, a Republican president himself, protested about the atrocities there and rang the Israelis to protest against it. I'm not absolving Ronald Reagan of his terrible crimes, by the way, but the contrast with it doesn't look good for Joe Biden, in that Reagan was more affronted and intervened more in that sense than Biden. But you had obviously the Shabra and Shatila massacre, horrific slaughter refugee camp. Then we had the 2006 Lebanon War. We had the Daher Doctrine, which attacked civilian infrastructure in order to put pressure on your enemy, terrorism. And that was obviously, so I'm just wondering, just, you know, in terms of what's going on now with Lebanon and how likely you think there could be an all-out war, including this genocidal statements about Lebanon, I would say, blood-curdling stuff coming out from Israeli ministers.
Yeah, I mean, genocidal, and it's funny, they do, for whatever reason, there's this addiction to tweeting pictures of Beirut with the tag before on it, implying that there's going to be an after picture of Beirut completely flattened and looking effectively like Gaza. This fantasizing about destroying major Arab cities in the region, I find incredibly distasteful and just absolutely awful and disgusting.
Sick.
But yeah. It's what has changed here, though, and I think it is somewhat meaningful in terms of the dynamics in the region, is that Hezbollah in South Lebanon now has meaningful and serious deterrence capacity against Israel in a way that has never before. The 2006 war was effectively a surprise for Israel. Hezbollah drove Israel out of Lebanon through guerrilla warfare over a very, very long period of time. And it just got to the point to where Israel did not want to remain in a situation in which its soldiers is going to be subject to frequent attack when they could just pull out and end that conflict. And so they ended that occupation under pressure from Hezbollah. Mm-hmm. And when the 2006 incident occurred, in which Hezbollah had captured a couple of Israeli soldiers in an operation as a means of freeing Lebanese prisoners in Israeli dungeons, Israel assumed that it had an idea of what Hezbollah was and invaded Lebanon full force, thinking this is going to be a cakewalk. And the consequence of that is that Hezbollah kept firing rockets. By the way, once again, unsurprising to you, it will be familiar to people who are watching what's happening in Gaza. Israel set out a bunch of goals for what they're going to do in Lebanon. Chief among them was the complete destruction of Hezbollah and the retrieval of the bodies of the 2 Israeli soldiers that were taken. And of course, they could not do that. And during the course of the war, they kept lowering their goals to try to achieve to basically achieve any kind of victory. And they've hit rock bottom when they've said, okay, the goal of this war now is to end the rocket fire from Lebanon, to basically destroy all the rocket launchers. And they could not do that either. And it was several weeks into this conflict when Israel came to terms with the fact that they can't win anything, and Israeli soldiers were being killed at significant numbers throughout this conflict, that Israel decided to accept a ceasefire and end the conflict without having achieved its goals. In the process, though, doing what they do best, punish the civilian population in a way that is absolutely monstrous. They flattened entire areas. They've killed over 1,000 Lebanese civilians in the course of that war. And there was a quote from a commander in the Israeli military who said in Haaretz, quote, "What we did was insane and monstrous. We covered entire towns and villages with cluster bombs." And that was in reference to Israel having dropped more than 1 million cluster munitions all over South Lebanon. And cluster munitions don't always explode instantly. Sometimes they're left over behind. And when children are playing outside, they see this object, they don't know what it is, they run up to it, they pick it up, and then it explodes. And so you end up with dozens of Lebanese civilians, including children, who are being killed year after year as a result of those cluster munitions that have littered all of South Lebanon. That is, once again, what Israel points to as deterrence, is that we can make the lives of civilians in Lebanon hell in the case of conflict, and that's our punishment. So now here we are, many years later, 2024, and Hezbollah has acquired an even larger and more sophisticated set of rockets with Iranian assistance. Many of them very smart guided missiles in which they can hit virtually any target in all of Israel. So it's a very, very significant capability. And Hezbollah's message is anything you can do to Lebanon, Hezbollah can in return do to Israel as well. And so you do have this mutually assured destruction calculus now, where neither side wants an all-out war, because the consequences of it are the complete devastation of Lebanon, but also the complete devastation of Israel too. And as an act of solidarity with Gaza, Hezbollah decided that they're going to start launching small rockets and munitions at cell towers and things of that sort right across the border into Israel as a means of keeping up the pressure that there's still this additional cost and tension that, and they said that this will not stop until the genocide in Gaza stops. And Israel has responded by escalating in South Lebanon, and Hezbollah has been meeting Israel's escalation. Every time Israel throws out, launches a bunch of airstrikes, either destroys some buildings, kills a bunch of civilians, or targets Hezbollah members, Hezbollah's been turning around and doing the exact same thing on the Israeli side as well. And we're reaching a threshold at this point where you can no longer describe these as tiny little pinpoint, pinpricks on either side, that you're starting to see widespread fires and destruction on both sides of the border. And it looks like we're escalating towards, we're building up towards this major confrontation that would have absolutely devastating consequences. And there is no way for Israel to win that conflict. All they can do, as they have done in Gaza, is destroy large parts of Lebanon. And that is precisely what they're threatening. Israeli military officials are speaking right now, talking about the need to devastate the civilian infrastructure in Lebanon as a means of putting pressure on Hezbollah. But of course, if they were to take that step, Hezbollah would also be taking much more significant military steps against Israel. And the Biden administration does not want that war. It does not want that conflict. It's been urging Israel to find a way out of it. And the truth is, the only way out of it is an end to the massacre in Gaza. Because as long as this massacre, this genocidal massacre is unfolding, there is nothing to stop this tit for tat on the Lebanese border from escalating. It's already reached a fairly significant threshold at this point and seems to be pretty clearly set to continue building unless the adults in the room intervene. And nobody's intervening because nobody can say no to Israel. Nobody knows how to constrain them in any way possible. And we're just watching the region walk towards this prospect of utter devastation, which could easily spin, by the way, out of control into a much broader regional war. Absolutely. And it all comes down to the United States' unwillingness, political cowardice. When I say inability, I realize that might be misconstrued as the United States being genuinely unable to constrain Israel. It really is unwillingness born out of political cowardice of U.S. political leaders to constrain Israel, which is the reason why we're slow walking our way towards this prospect of the just unimaginable consequences of a major significant war between Hezbollah and Israel at this point.
Horrific. A grim place to end, but it is what it is. The material we have is the material we have. We have to talk about it openly and honestly. And you've spoken as ever with huge knowledge, depth, clarity. It's always brilliant to have you. And every time we have you on, I'm sure you see the comments. People are so appreciative of everything that you say and being able to learn from your insights. So please do share this video, everyone. Press like, subscribe, comments, leave comments. It's good for the algorithm. More people then watch the video. We want to get the message out. That's the whole point. But Omar, thank you so much as ever. Honestly, brilliant stuff.
Thank you so much, Owen. Really appreciate your time as well.